In today's video, we're going to delve into 3 distinct cold cases, each solved after decades of mystery. The common thread among these stories, secrets that remained hidden for years, finally coming to light. Brace yourselves, we're stepping into the crime scene now. We are going to Aloha, a city in Oregon, United States, with a population of 50,000. Donald Barton was born in Aloha in 1959, attended Aloha High School, and lived with his family. He was an excellent hockey player on the high school team, and he also balanced a part-time job at a restaurant. His best friend, Peter Zito, also born in 1957, shared his journey through Aloha High School and was his teammate on the ice hockey team. Peter cherished his 1956 Oldsmobile, dedicating much time to its upkeep. However, on October 3, 1974, a devastating turn of events unfolded as he and his friend Donald, while working on the car in a parking lot, were abruptly shot and killed by an unidentified assailant. The incident turned an ordinary night into a nightmare for their families and loved ones. The horrifying details emerged the next morning. Early in the morning, a newspaper delivery person found the bodies of 2 boys in a parking lot and reported it to the police. Detectives and forensic experts arrived at the scene and conducted a thorough examination. The investigation revealed that Donald Barton was shot in the back of the head while working on Peter's car, and his body fell onto the car's bodywork. Peter was found standing beside the car, caught up in the tragic sequence of events. Tragically, he was also shot in the forehead and killed. The tragic discovery of their bodies near the driver's door spoke volumes of the sudden, brutal nature of the attack, leaving no chance for defense. Investigators gathered evidence at the scene and interviewed all individuals in the area, pursuing every lead, no matter how small. During the investigation, detectives asked if anyone had heard screams or noticed anything unusual on the night of the murder. However, no clues were found. The autopsy results revealed that the boys were shot with a .22 caliber gun. Additionally, detectives uncovered a significant lead. They discovered that Donald and Chris, a co-worker from the Black Angus restaurant where Donald worked part-time, had a rivalry. Suspicion fell on Chris, a co-worker of Donald, fueled by their known but undefined disagreements. However, just 12 hours after the murders, the police announced the arrest of their prime suspect. Surprisingly, it was not Chris as many had speculated, but instead, Joseph Amir Wilson, an 18-year-old student. Earlier that day, Joseph had been attacked at the entertainment center and had reported this assault to the police. The police believed that Joseph sought revenge and mistakenly shot Zito and Donald, who were working on a car in the parking lot, in retaliation. A search warrant was issued for Joseph's house, where a safe, over 100 knives, and a series of weapons were found. Among the evidence, a loaded gun discovered under his pillow stood out as particularly noteworthy. The detectives questioned Joseph about the weapons. He vehemently denied any involvement in the incident, asserting that the gun found under his pillow was his late father's. The police sent the weapons for testing, and after meticulous analysis, none of the guns matched the weapon used in the murders of Zito and Donald. Joseph vehemently denied any involvement in the crime and sought release, but the inspectors were not ready to let him go. Joseph's defense attorneys fervently argued for his innocence, maintaining that he was not responsible for the murders. Despite many unanswered questions and doubts, Joseph Wilson was released, leaving many in the community feeling uneasy. Initially, inspectors turned their suspicions towards Stephen Chris, Donald's co-worker, spurred by the well-known tension that had been brewing between them. With Joseph's release, attention returned to Chris, and this time they investigated him more thoroughly. Chris, previously arrested for theft, was also known to have a .22 caliber gun, a detail that caught the detectives' attention. detectives tested the gun to see if it was the same one used in the young men's murders, but no match was found. The case went cold over the years. In 2022, detectives from the Washington County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation to close this cold case. The ballistic report revealed that the .22 caliber gun, previously linked to Chris, was a perfect match for the bullets used in the murders. This same gun had been used in another tragic incident, the murder of Sergeant Jacob Kim Brown. Brown was fatally shot in the head, a grim outcome of his dispute with Stephen Chris. 2 years after the boys' murders, Chris joined the U.S. Army and served at Fort Lewis Naval Base in Washington. Chris, burdened with a debt of several $100s to Brown for car damages, resorted to a shocking and fatal decision: shooting Brown instead of settling the debt. Chris was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. He was released on parole after 12 years. In 2022, renewed investigations uncovered evidence suggesting that the boys had indeed encountered Chris on the day of their murder, pointing towards a targeted attack. Washington County detectives arrested him without incident at his home in Aloha, charging him with double homicide. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives acknowledged this arrest as a historic moment. It marked the oldest known ballistic match in the country. In a twist of fate, the same handcuffs used to detain Chris 50 years ago were used again in 2022. Stephen's arrest, 48 years later, brought justice to the victims' families. Sheriff Pat Garrett delivered an emotional speech at a press conference with Peter's sister Barbara listening in tears.
It's a difficult thing to deal with, to have to accept that, your brother can be murdered this way and there is nobody accountable for it.
Before we dive into our next story, if you could take a moment to hit that like button, it would mean the world to us. A single click for you is a huge boost of encouragement for us. Bradley Bolino was born in Youngstown, Ohio on April 7, 1959. His parents, Joseph and Elisa Bellino, were well known in their community. Brad was described as a cheerful and kind child. Elisa served as a procurement officer at a company, while his father was a longtime employee at a local steel company. Brad's family lived in a peaceful neighborhood where children played outdoors under the streetlights. Crime was rare in this area. However, in early 1972, unfortunate events would change the tranquil town. Brad and Dawn were 6th grade students attending the same middle school. They were close friends, and their parents knew each other well, living only 4 kilometers apart. On Friday, March 31, 1972, due to the Easter holiday, the children left school early, spent the day roaming the town, and returned to Dawn's house. Brad had planned to spend the night at Dawn's, returning home the next day at 4 p.m. However, he changed his mind in the morning and decided to return home by 9 p.m. instead. Normally, Dawn's mother drove Brad home for safety, but on that day, she was at the market, leaving flu-ridden Dawn's father at home. Brad walked home, taking a familiar route. He left Dawn's house at 7:30 p.m. Unfortunately, this would be the last time his best friend saw him alive. That evening, Brad's father returned home from work and assumed he had changed his mind about staying at Dawn's. Around 2 a.m., Joseph woke up, called Dawn's parents, and said he would come to pick up his son in an hour. Dawn's father told him that Brad had left 16 hours earlier to walk home alone. Joseph searched for his son but found no trace of him. Dawn's worried family also joined the search, scouring their neighborhood from 2 directions. Around 3 a.m. on Friday, Joseph reached the sheriff's office in their district and reported the disappearance. Authorities searched for Brad by combing through the route he would have taken home, nearby parks and hospitals. On Tuesday morning, the search came to a horrific end with a discovery by city sanitation worker Paul Smith. While collecting trash at Layumon Plaza, Paul discovered the lifeless body of Bradley Bellino under a dumpster. Bradley Bellino, version latest 2. Bellino lay face down, his small sneakers jammed against the dumpster's corner, trousers pulled down. It appeared that he had been sexually assaulted. His belt, tightly fastened around his neck and likely the cause of death, led Paul to immediately notify the police. Tony, a young officer at the sheriff's office and cousin to Brad, was first informed and quickly arrived at the scene to confirm the identity. The body, after being carefully removed from the dumpster, was transferred to a hospital in Youngstown for examination, awaiting autopsy results. The medical examiner revealed that Brad had been strangled and suffered appalling physical abuse. Brad was last seen alive 24 hours before his death, which occurred around 9 p.m. on Saturday. The police called in Brad's friend Don during the investigation. Don was the last person to see Brad and was asked to identify the clothes found with the body. Don confirmed that the clothes found on the corpse matched those Brad was wearing the day they last met. During the investigation, the detectives asked Don about the belt found around Brad's neck. Don stated that the belt, marked size 22, was too large for a 6-year-old and did not belong to Brad. Don recalled a suspicious incident that occurred on the tragic day. He mentioned that they were followed by a brown minibus, which they saw several times that day. They even joked about being kidnapped before deciding to head home. Acting on Don's account of the minibus, police tracked several vehicles yet failed to locate the brown minibus or any suspects. Brad's funeral was attended by hundreds, and his loved ones mourned his loss while yearning for justice. Unbeknownst to them, it would take nearly 50 years to identify the culprit and close the case. Following Brad's death, Don's family constantly encountered reminders of the tragedy, facing accusations of responsibility for his disappearance, a burden that became unbearable. In 1972, the family decided to move on and left the city permanently. Despite their diligent efforts in questioning numerous suspects, detectives found that progress in solving Brad's murder case was stalling. Every step led to a dead end, and over time, the case grew cold, putting justice for Brad on hold. Former police chief Jeffrey Patterson reignited the case in 2001 and refused to let it remain unsolved. The detective, in an effort to reopen the investigation, decided to exhume Brad's grave to gather DNA evidence. DNA samples were collected from Brad's thigh bone and his mother. The DNA found on his clothes did not match Brad's, indicating it came from someone else. A forensic dental exam confirmed teeth marks on the belt around his neck. The dental marks on the belt were insufficient for creating a complete comparison model, leading to a dead end in the investigation. The DNA found on the clothes was used to create a DNA profile, which was uploaded to the National Forensic Database. Despite all efforts, the investigation in 2007 failed, and Police Chief Jeffrey decided to hand over the file to 2 new detectives. Detectives Jack and Bob, only 14 at the time of Brad's disappearance, were from his neighborhood. Years later, they brought a fresh perspective to the investigation and identified 7 major suspects. Their efforts were aimed at bringing justice for Brad. They obtained search warrants and took DNA samples from 2 of them, but no matches were found. In 2018, detectives from the Boardman Sheriff's Office approached Parabon Nanolabs for DNA analysis of Brad's case. At first, the tests yielded no results. However, after 4 years and an investment of $29,000, the elusive individual was at last identified. Detectives located this individual's family and voluntarily obtained a DNA sample from a relative. Finally, all their hard work with the DNA tests bore fruit. Joseph Norman Hill was identified as the individual with a 98% probability of the DNA found on Brad's clothes belonging to him. The detectives arrested him, but faced a significant obstacle. Joseph was deceased. He had passed away in 2019 after a long battle with cancer, and his body had been cremated. Further investigation revealed that Joseph was 32 years old at the time of the murder and lived nearby. Joseph, employed as a truck driver for a water company, remained in the city following the murder, only moving to California in 1978. The murderer acted randomly, and there were no known connections between Joseph and Brad's families. On January 24, 2023, Boardman Police Chief Todd Worth held a press conference to announce the closure of the case. Wendy Agga was born in Bellingham, Washington on February 15, 1958. In 1987, she was living in her hometown with her daughter, Charlena. At that time, Wendy was attending beauty school to pursue her dreams. She hoped that this education would provide a brighter future for both herself and her daughter. On April 24, 1987, after leaving beauty school, Wendy went to a restaurant for lunch. She returned and excitedly told her friends about meeting a man named Mike at the restaurant. Wendy was deeply impressed by him. She was so taken that she even arranged a date. While preparing for her first date with Mike, Wendy planned to leave her daughter with a babysitter and drop her off at the sitter's home. Wendy and Mike spent the evening at a cozy gathering at the home of one of Wendy's closest friends, immersed in lively conversation and laughter. The night ended without any issues, and everyone went home. Unbeknownst to her friend, this was the last time Wendy would be seen alive. Upon realizing that Wendy had not returned, the babysitter waited anxiously for hours. As worry set in, she promptly reported Wendy's disappearance to the police. The police promptly responded and began their investigation at Wendy's house. Upon entering, they immediately searched for clues that could help locate Wendy. The bedroom presented a disturbing sight. There were 2 dried blood stains on the bed, a blood-soaked sheet and another unidentifiable stain. It was evident that a violent incident had taken place. Detectives contacted Wendy's friends for information and asked them to come to the sheriff's office. The investigation revealed that Mike, a bartender at a restaurant and the last person seen with Wendy, had mysteriously disappeared. In the course of the investigation, it was discovered that he drove a 1972 Ford car. Further investigation uncovered that Wendy's car had crossed the border from Canada to the U.S. Mike disappeared at the same time as Wendy. U.S. Customs officials had taken a photo of her and soon identified a suspect who resembled Mike. Wendy's abandoned car was later found in Eugene, Oregon. Inside the car, investigators found a bloodstain, men's trousers, and a Burger King hamburger box. Darren ONeal, a man with a lengthy criminal record, including robbery and assault, was identified as the suspect through fingerprints found on the box. Through meticulous detective work, it was uncovered that Mike was actually an alias cleverly adopted by Darren, deepening the intrigue of their investigation. Fingerprints taken from the job application at the restaurant where Mike worked matched those of Darren ONeal. In a cunning game of cat and mouse, despite the authorities' relentless pursuit, Darren skillfully evaded capture, constantly altering his appearance to stay one step ahead. In September 1987, detectives in Florida apprehended Darren, who was in possession of a stolen vehicle. He was brought back to Washington State to face trial for his heinous crimes. It became evident that his criminal activities extended beyond Wendy's case. In a heartbreaking turn of events, just 4 weeks before Wendy vanished, the community was shaken by the disappearance of 21-year-old Robin Smith, whose remains were later discovered under tragic circumstances. Darren confessed to Robin's murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he did not reveal any information about Wendy's whereabouts. In August 1990, it was discovered that Darren had also tortured a 14-year-old girl in 1987. Following this horrific revelation, Darren was handed an additional sentence of 135 years for his unthinkable crime against the young girl. While Darren's imprisonment brought some sense of justice, Wendy's whereabouts remained unknown. Despite the efforts of her family, friends, and authorities, Wendy's whereabouts remained unknown for years. As the mystery remained unsolved, the family's dwindling hope of finding Wendy alive slowly faded away. In 2015, the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory presented a report on the evidence found in Wendy's home years before. They confirmed that a suspicious stain on Wendy's sheet, identified years ago, was semen, and upon analysis, it matched Darren as expected. In 2020, Wendy's bloodstain was found on men's trousers in her car, which were linked to Darren. This discovery conclusively implicated Darren in Wendy's disappearance and probable tragic end. Authorities charged Darren with Wendy's murder and set his bail at $10 million. He was transferred from an Oregon prison to Washington. Then, in a significant courtroom moment on March 10, 2023, Darren faced the judge, audaciously claiming innocence despite the mountain of evidence against him. Darren's trial is still ongoing. Adding to his heinous profile, Utah detectives have identified Darren as the prime suspect in a chilling series of 3 female homicides from 1985, reinforcing the grim suspicion that he is, in fact, a serial killer. Before we conclude this video, please be aware that the video on the left may be disturbing. It is recommended for adult viewing only. On the right, you'll find a playlist of videos that have been highly appreciated by our viewers.